Going to call up Congressman Esposito and I are going to just go through. We're going to hear from a few people in labor. You'll hear from us. I want to start with Rob Zavante from PBA. Where's Rob?
Right here.
Right behind him. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Good morning. My name is Robert Zavante. I'm the president of the Port Authority Sergeants Benevolent Association. I'm also the chair of a coalition representing all of New York and New Jersey's Port Authority workers, whose leaders are here today and joining us. Along with Congressman Gottheimer, Congressman Esposito, we stand here today to call for an exemption from the MTA's reckless and misguided congestion pricing plan for our workforce. Put simply, the MTA's financial struggles should not be solved on the backs of the essential workers who continue to get squeezed as a result of the MTA's mismanagement. Last spring, a report commissioned by the MTA identified ways to mitigate potential harm of congestion pricing on disadvantaged communities. But what about the financial harm that will be inflicted on the essential Port Authority workers whose pockets will be picked every time they commute in and out of the congestion pricing zone? The challenges of the last several years, including the pandemic, have taken a heavy toll on our workforce. Forcing essential Port Authority workers to pay higher taxes is not the answer. According to the MTA's own projection and publicly available data, with fewer cars going south of 60th Street from the congestion pricing tax, the Port Authority could lose $125 million for fewer drivers driving over the George Washington Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, or the Holland Tunnel, which amounts to more than $1.25 billion over the next decade. This lost revenue will impact the Port Authority's capital projects, contracts, and day-to-day operations. If Port Authority workers begin leaving the workforce in a large number, the entire Port Authority system will be jeopardized, and an understaffed Port Authority system will eventually produce economic shockwaves to both our bi-state commerce industry and the tourism industries, both which happen to fund the MTA currently. In closing, the train may have already left the station regarding the MTA's congestion pricing plan, which takes effect next spring. But before that happens, we demand that the MTA leadership exempt all Port Authority workers from their misguided plan. We will continue to serve the public while the MTA picks our pockets regardless. Thank you, and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Pat Reynolds, the president of TWU.
Excellent.
Good morning. Thanks, Rob. I proudly stand here today with the other union leaders and other labor groups from the Port Authority to express our discomfort, and we're not happy with this price planning as well. I'm concerned about my workers that have to come through Manhattan from Long Island and North Jersey over the George Washington Bridge and the Lincoln Tunnel, respectively, to Rob's point, to get whacked by this $23 a day. They have to drive to their workplace when public transportation is not available. This is a forced congestion price plan that doesn't work for the TWU. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Pat. I want to thank everyone behind me, all law enforcement, all the unions. I'm very excited that Congressman Esposito is here today. He was an incredible champion on this issue. Assemblyman Hader, thank you so much. Councilman, thank you. You heard from Rob from Port Authority Sergeants Association. We've got Steve Ham and Pat Reynolds, and Pat was unbelievable as ever. Jimmy's here. I know Conti couldn't be here from Port Authority PBA President. He sent a great team. I want to thank him. For the communications workers, Vice President Local 68, Herrera, thank you so much for your incredible leadership, all the field maintenance supervisors, the men and women of labor, IBW 164, Mayor Mishagna, who's also a great leader at 164. Thank you all, and thank you for your fight and never wavering. And I want to say on Esposito, not only did he make the trip here, but he's been working together with me and others on the bipartisan anti-congestion tax legislation. I want to thank him for his leadership on this issue, on fighting to restore SALT, and all the good he's doing for people, and he's former law enforcement. We're very grateful to him. And I'm very proud to be standing beside our brave Port Authority law enforcement who put their lives on the line every day to protect us and our critical infrastructure in the region, helping families fight terror and crime. We're joined by all these local men and women of labor who help build this state, build our country, and keep it moving every single day. They make sure Jersey's trains, buses, bridges, tunnels, airports, rails, ports, terminals are always open and safe and running smoothly. Without them, our infrastructure would come to a halt, our trains would be delayed, our planes would be grounded, and our economy here would be ground to a halt. I also want to express my unwavering support for the men and women of New Jersey Transit Brotherhood locomotive engineers and trainmen. You probably saw what they're doing. For Jersey to excel, we need a strong and safe mass transit system, and that wouldn't be possible without the hardworking men and women of New Jersey Transit locomotive engineers and trainmen. Now we're in Fort Lee, overlooking the GW Bridge, which is loud and behind us. If New York and the MTA have their way, Jersey and the outer boroughs, all the commuters, including the hardworking men and women of labor behind me and next to me, will be paying a new $23 a day, $5,000 a year congestion tax just to go to work in the city. That's $23 a day on top of the tolls commuters already pay, whether they're from Long Island, whether they're coming from outer boroughs, whether they're coming from Jersey, whether they're coming from Hackensack, New Jersey, or Hempstead in Long Island. And that's on top of parking and gas. You're talking about $100 a day, $100 a day before you get a cup of coffee. So here in Fort Lee, where the New York's MTA told the federal government in black and white in their own report that the congestion tax will lead to new traffic patterns, including massive car traffic at the Holland and Lincoln tunnels, and a surge of traffic right here at the GW Bridge. That truck traffic will also spike in New York's outer boroughs. The result? Plumes of new pollution, including toxins like formaldehyde that cause cancer and asthma in children and families. The governor of New York and the head of the MTA have admitted that they need the cash, and that's why they're doing this. Because the MTA is so woefully mismanaged at their hands and in debt. They lost $700 million last year to fare skippers. So the MTA needs $1 billion a year from the congestion tax off the backs of hardworking folks who often lack mass transit options and have no choice but to drive to work. I believe we need to invest heavily in better and more available trains, buses, and environmental solutions. But not one penny from the congestion tax will help New Jersey Transit, not one penny to Port Authority, not one penny for the PATH train or the bus terminal. I helped write and pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which had $4.5 billion to improve Jersey's public transit, and is at long last helping build the Gateway Trade Tunnel. Yesterday, a few of us were in Sussex County, inspecting the site of a potential new Amtrak and Jersey Transit station. We must do more for mass transit, but these efforts will take years. So the answer isn't to say to commuters who have no choice but to get in their car to work and feed their family, hey, we're gonna whack you. That's unacceptable. Nurses, taxi drivers, and the hardworking men and women of labor, they come in, they go to work. Transit workers, communication workers, law enforcement, building trades. The MTA and its chairman, John O'Lieber, they don't care that suddenly this is going to cost all these folks behind me $23 a day to get to work more. These are the very people who protect our communities, drive and fix the trains and buses, run our airports and ports, build and fix our roads and bridges and tunnels, and keep this artery with 20% of the GDP of the country running through here. They keep it running. These folks often have no choice but to drive. They got to get in early or late to make a shift, and their jobs often require vehicles. Yet, believe it or not, the MTA's answer to the problems they created, and Esposito knows this, we've talked about it, they just want to stick it to hardworking men and women of labor, right? The MTA is trying to take a 2x4 to the people behind us. Why? Because they are desperate for a cash grab to fix their mismanagement. And a lot of these folks just won't be able to afford this new tax. So many have told me they're going to have to leave their jobs. Others will never apply. And we're talking about jobs that are already experiencing mass shortages. Yet despite knowing all this, New York has the nerve to slap our police and labor and transit workers and CWA across the face with a $23 a day new congestion tax. New York is willing to risk losing these essential workers so they can bail out the MTA from their mismanagement. And that's why we're here today. I'll tell you, you don't screw with Jersey and you don't mess with a former cop behind me, right? It's the bottom line. And I can tell you right now, we got allies like Governor Murphy, Democratic and Republican colleagues in Congress in Jersey and New York. If New York's plan to tax our first responders and labor isn't bad enough, there's one more point I want to make before turning it over to Anthony. According to the MTA's own projections, and if what they say is true, what the MTA says is true in their report, 20% of drivers will stop coming to the congestion zone. They'll be priced out of going to work. They won't be able to afford to go to Manhattan to their jobs. And guess what will happen to the Port Authority? It will leave $1 billion hole, or $1.25 billion hole in lost revenue over the next decade of the Port Authority. Fewer commuters equals fewer tolls, fewer investment for infrastructure. That's $1.25 billion less for the Port Authority's capital projects. The MTA is literally robbing Peter to pay Paul to help themselves out at the cost of the people behind me. That will gut new invest in our region's mass transit, including the new planned bus terminal in the city, to replace the current decrepit, maxed out one. It'll stop investment in the PATH train and all the work upgrading LaGuardia, Newark, and Kennedy airports, not to mention critical safety work at the aging GW Bridge, tunnels, and ports. I talked to Kevin O'Toole, and Rick Cotton have done an unbelievable job at the port, leading the way with the people behind me. You're going to literally cut the legs out from underneath them. My question to the MTA, how are you going to close this massive budget gap at the Port Authority? John O'Lieber, how are you going to do it? What's the plan to keep infrastructure investment in the region and mass transit when you literally gut the budget of the Port Authority? The bottom line is the congestion tax is not about reducing pollution or traffic. It's a cash grab, and they're willing to do it on the backs of the hardworking men and women of labor, and the backs of our families here in Jersey, in Long Island, the outer boroughs, Westchester, Staten Island, all at the risk of giving cancer to our children with the backed up trucks here at the GW Bridge. We need our Port Authority police, we need our transportation workers, our administrative staff, our field supervisors, our communication workers, our maintenance workers, engineers, electricians, mechanics, carpenters, we need all of them. New Jersey and New York are nothing without them, without the people behind us. So we'll never stop fighting to protect all of them, because we know how immensely important they are to us, to the law enforcement protecting us, to our safety. You've always had our backs. It's time New York, the governor there, wakes up and gets your backs. My recommendation to the MTA, don't blow 100 years of cooperation with the Port Authority between our two states. Do the right thing. Don't make the hardworking moms and dads who have the overnight shift, labor who built your city, or law enforcement who keeps us safe, don't make them pick up the tab for your mismanagement. We're never going to stop fighting. If we work together in the greatest country in the world, there's nothing we can't do together, like we always have. But if you divide us, if you keep doing this plan, you'll do nothing but hurt this region and hurt the relationship between our two states. May God bless you and God bless our great country. And now I want to introduce a great champion, not just in stopping the congestion tax, but for the region, my friend Congressman D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Congressman Gottheimer, and thank you for punching my passport into New Jersey this morning. I want to say thank you first. I want to say thank you to all the hard-working men and women who stand with us. They are the essential workers, the men and women that hold the line each and every day, moving our communities forward. And while very often you see so-called leaders in our communities, they like to take pictures with them at parades or when it's popular to do so. When the rubber meets the road, they are very often silent. And I want you all to know that you have two strong voices that are going to stand with you each and every day. It's very simple. For far too long, hardworking men and women of New York and New Jersey and the tri-state area have served as the ATM for the MTA. We see it here. Congestion pricing is a cash grab. It's not to make roads less traveled. It's not to promote clean energy. It's a cash grab. It's about funding the mismanagement of the MTA that has gone on for far too long. And what's unique about this situation is that we stand here today in the foot of the George Washington Bridge. This isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democrat issue. This is a hardworking, blue-collar, tri-state area issue. And when you see on the mainstream media, you hear about the swamp that Josh and I work in, and people say nothing gets done. Nobody works together. There is nothing moving forward in Washington, D.C. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is government at work. Two guys who are looking to fight for what's right. Two guys that are willing to put their necks on the line and stand up against government because they're imposing restrictions that are absolutely ridiculous. And it's not to do any good. It's simply to fill coffers and make sure that they have money to continue mismanagement. Just 2 weeks ago, I proudly serve as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And before we went to recess, and many people say, oh, Congress goes to recess for the month of August and they disappear. Well, they don't, because Congressman Gottheimer and I, we're here. Our boots are on the ground. And we made sure, as co-sponsors of this legislation, that we got it through committee before we head out for the August recess. And we are going to talk to leadership on both sides of the aisle and make sure that that resolution hits the floor. And that resolution is very clear in saying a few things. We, Democrats and Republicans, stand against congestion pricing. We, Democrats and Republicans, are making it very clear that no federal funding, zero federal dollars, should be utilized to implement congestion pricing. And lastly, Democrats and Republicans making it crystal clear to Governor Hochul that we are not going to go silent. We are going to raise our voices each and every day. Why? Because this plan, spoken like a true New Yorker, screws hardworking men and women who are trying to do the right thing, who go out each and every day to put food on their table. Think about it. I've spoken to local business owners in the 4th Congressional District on Long Island, individuals who send trucks into the city each and every day. They are looking at tens of thousands of dollars added to their costs annually. Where do we think those costs are going? It's going to consumers. And why do we think New York? It leads the country in out-migration because people can't afford to live there. And that's why we are working again, Democrats and Republicans, to restore that SALT deduction to states that are taxed so highly. But this is another example of overreach in our state government. They started with cashless bail, and you could speak to any member of law enforcement. I proudly wore the uniform for 16 years as an NYPD detective. Cashless bail has taken the handcuffs out of our gun belts and put them on the hardworking men and women who protect our streets every day. They tried it with redistricting. They tried it with ancillary housing, and now they're doing it with congestion pricing. This isn't political. It's about right and wrong. And I am thankful to have partners in government, a guy from New Jersey, a guy from New York, who are going to stand shoulder to shoulder and fight that good fight. So thank you all. Thank you all for everything that you do. Thank you for what you continue to do. And thank you, Congressman Gottheimer, for your leadership and working together. I appreciate it.
You guys have any questions?
Just clarify who exactly you're calling the exemption for? Port Authority employees, which are other unions here. What are you calling this exemption for, and roughly how many people do you think that may affect? Tens of thousands, 100,000?
So we're calling for exemption for all Port Authority employees that work for the Port Authority. Roughly over 5,000. And just to put some light on the subject, the average Port Authority employee works about 260 days a year. Under this congestion pricing plan, the $23 a day roughly adds up to about $6,000. And that's just on their normal scheduled work. When they have to be mandated to come in due to an emergency, Hurricane Sandy, the blackout, 9/11, etc., they're forced to come in with no end in sight. So it's going to affect all of the workers at the Port Authority. And that's why we're asking the MTA to exempt all the workers at the Port Authority. Thank you.
Just the one thing I... Spell your name.
My name, Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, Zafonte, Z as in Zulu, A-F-O-N-T-E.
Is there a legislative solution to the idea you propose exempting Port Authority employees? Right now, we go to the Traffic Mobility Review Board, which really isn't taking input right now from the public. So is there either a federal or a state legislative solution, and is that being worked on?
Well, you know, federally, as Anthony said, federally, there's several pieces of legislation that have been put forward, including the bill we've done together, that says if they want to move forward, if the MTA wants to move forward, they're going to lose their federal funding, right? Because right now they get $2 billion a year from the federal government, meaning people in Long Island and Jersey are paying out of their pockets in federal dollars already to the MTA. Like during the pandemic, they got $15 billion gone. They blew it already, the MTA. They're blowing $2 billion a year. They're running more than $2 billion a year deficits, right? So one, there's legislation that says stop funding them if they want to go forward with this mismanaged idea. Two, if they should get audited immediately to understand what are they doing with all this cash? How did they blow $700 million last year on fare skippers alone at the MTA? To understand it, and they shouldn't be allowed to go forward, as Anthony said, if they, on the federal support and resources from what the federal government gives, if they want to go forward with this, right? And my opinion on exemptions, everybody should be exempt. There should be no congestion tax, right? There should be, I don't care, you're talking about a nurse, law enforcement, right? An Uber driver, a taxi driver, everybody should be exempted because there shouldn't be a congestion tax. People already pay far too much, 17 bucks a day, to have to go over this bridge. It's expensive, or through the tunnels, right? It's expensive. The idea that you're gonna whack them with another $23 a day is insane, in my opinion. And the other point that Anthony made, I think, is very important. You got Democrats and Republicans coming together. There's nothing partisan about this. Right? Anthony and I are in the Problem Solvers Caucus together. Very proud of that. So we work together to solve problems. And I'll tell you, you're a Democrat or Republican, you come up on the street to us, which I'm sure a lot of people come up to the congressman, and they make it very clear. They can't afford this, right? So there should be no congestion tax. And the lawsuit in New Jersey that the governor introduced recently takes steps in that direction.
Follow-up question. I was referring to a Plan B sort of approach that goes beyond the federal, it goes more to the state. You know, have any of the union representatives talk to state legislators to get some kind of protection you're looking for, the exemption, in case you have no traction with the traffic mobility?
So the Port Authority is a unique organization, and we would need to legislate that in the state of New York and the state of New Jersey. We're asking the MTA leadership to exempt us. Therefore, we don't have to attempt to legislate it. We don't have to attempt to go to the federal government, try to have somebody to basically stop this. That's where we are.
Has that formally been requested of the MTA? You know, in a letter, a telephone, email, something?
I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen with exemptions is that the MTA has told us that they're going to roll out a plan and give bullet points as to who will be receiving exemptions, how do you receive these exemptions. As far as I know, we haven't seen anything, and like you mentioned yourself, the agency that's handling it, they're not even taking public comment. So this is a situation that has been in the darkness of night, and quite frankly, not to get political, but the New York State Legislature there's a supermajority in the Assembly, a majority in the Senate. You know, they don't seem to disagree very often with Governor Hochul. So the issues that we're facing are very important, and that's why we have press conferences like today to raise awareness, because in addition to congestion pricing, we saw just 3 or 4 months ago the MTA also increased fares, and they talked about one of the reasons as to why they increased it was because crimes being committed on MTA buses and rails. Again, they're not focused on tackling the issue at hand. They're focused on just continuing to add more money and more burden to hardworking men and women who are traveling.
And I think John O'Lieber, the head of the MTA, was asked about all these exemptions, right? There's been hundreds of exemption people have put in for exemptions, hundreds of them, and he said, well, we can't do exemptions because we have to get enough money, right? Isn't that, he said something along those lines. You can look that up. Any questions? You guys good? Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.